We do have Mr. Svensson, however.
All right, Mr. Svensson, thank you so much for sticking around. You now have the floor.
Thank you. um, Kurt Svensson, Arnold, Maryland. In my previous testimony in support of Bill 9221, I noted the fact that I was the assistant budget officer at the time that this section of our code was first enacted. And I just want to repeat that and make it very clear that the current use of this section of code with respect to COVID relief funding is not consistent with the intent of this section of county code. The idea that millions of taxpayer funds can be expended without review and approval by the county council, the final fiscal authority, is just unconscionable to me. But more importantly, Bill 111 fails to recognize and respect the citizen perspective here. It's not just about the 3 and the 4, guys. At 2-hour, 32-minute mark of the December 14 council work session, Mr. Pruski spoke on behalf of this bill, on behalf of the 4 council members. Here's his quote. I know there was a discussion about the 3 and the 4 votes to get a resolution on the agenda. And I believe, and again, I've been on this council and served both in the minority and majority. And when voters elect the majority, that's part of the process, right? Voters make a decision. That's how it works out. Excuse me? We're talking about the appropriation of taxpayer funds here. The county charter requires the appropriation of funds be done via ordinance, not resolution. But even regardless of that, part of that process is a public hearing where citizens can hear about how the county is proposing to spend taxpayer funds. Look at the budget. $1,000 placeholders do not communicate to the community how taxpayer funds are going to be spent. That's a part of the process, folks. The administrations and county councils majorities continued reliance on their four vote majority to steamroll legislation throughout their tenure and to routinely ignore opportunities for compromise like this has played a major role in the excess of partisanship and, frankly, brokenness of county government that we can't even get mask agreements. It's unconscionable to me. Guys, please. And you did great. You had a seven vote majority, just the bill right before this. You know, you can do it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Svensson. The public hearing on bill number 111-21 and 112-21 is now closed. Thank you, Madam Secretary. Mr. Pruski.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to respond to Mr. Svensson because he kind of threw a couple things out there. First of all, I respect him. He was a great assistant budget officer. He made some good points there. But let me be clear, as a councilman, I've actually voted with Republicans on numerous occasions. And if it's a budget thing that I agree with them, I'll vote with them. So it's not a matter of Democrat, Republican. It's a matter of whether you agree with the philosophy. So I just want to make that clear. And secondly, if we went ahead and had a 3-person majority push, he's talking about partisanship. I think it would turn into partisanship based upon some of the things that have been brought up. So it's a two-headed dinosaur. I understand what he's saying, respect him. He actually brought up a good idea about ranked voting, which is interesting tonight. You know, there's a lot of things that we can discuss. That's why we have a charter review commission. But this council also has to have obviously some direction, and moving forward, there has to be some majority, whether it's bipartisan, together, whatever it is, to get things done. So again, thank him for his service. I appreciate his comments. And again, I just want to make sure that that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. And actually, I would like to ask a question just with respect to the issue raised by Mr. Svensson about, you know, the council ordinarily being the one that appropriates taxpayer dollars. Is there any, you know, are we in, I mean, this has been the practice with respect to CARES, and my understanding is that we haven't been in running afoul of county code in our practice of this. Has there been any consideration that we are running afoul in this? And I guess this could be for Ms. Blair Klausmeyer, or I see Mr. Swain.
I can answer as budget officer too.
I'll take Mr. Trumpauer. Thank you.
All right, all right. Well, so how about that? Chris Trumeyer, our budget officer. How about I'll answer it on behalf of the budget office, and either Mr. Swain or Ms. Glassmeyer can correct me if I say anything legally wrong. But so the power to appropriate the grant funds through the CARES Act was done in legislation when we received those funds. And then the power to appropriate the ARP funds, the American Rescue Plan funds, that was done with the 22 budget that passed. So that's where the authority comes from. And what this bill would do is require us to submit you all a resolution for anything over $500,000 before it was appropriated. And that does differ a little bit from current practice where we give you notification. But this bill would require us to actually submit a resolution, and then you all would have 2 business days to decide whether or not to hold a public hearing. And just to be clear, the administration is totally fine with this concept.
Thank you very much, Mr. Trumbauer. Would Office of Law like to add anything?
I don't think so. I think just expand a little bit on the 2022 budget. This is, and I'm sure everybody's aware, there are placeholders in the budget for these grants that are ultimately appropriated, and that's so they are can be conditionally appropriated, and that would be the process here. And the difference is this would just require some action of the council if it goes over a certain amount, if the increase in that appropriation goes over a certain amount.
Okay, thank you very much. Ms. Fiedler.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Amanda Fiedler, District 5. So I'm going to refer back to Mr. Svensson's testimony this evening, and then at the discussion on the previous legislation that I had introduced. I don't think that he's raising concern over being afoul right now. It's more that the process that is taking place right now in the code, that code section Mr. Svensson worked on creating, and the reason behind that legislation was to kind of prevent Office of Law and Finance from having to come to the council for an enormous amount of grant approvals as low as $5, $25. I mean, there was constant visits to the council. So it was more streamlining efficiencies for getting grant money out of the door, when the largest grant allocation that we were seeing is $250, maybe sometimes rarely $500,000 or more. This is millions of dollars. So there is public interest, and there's an incredible amount of grant funding going out the door. And I think that's where the difference is, that was not considered in that legislation that created this part of the code. So thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Hare.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Jessica Hare, District 7. Ms. Fiedler actually covered most of what I was going to say. I think the issue too is some of these placeholders are very small when the grants come in, you know, many times larger than the placeholder. Whereas, you know, so we're not really, the public isn't really getting a good look as to how much a grant is being funded in a particular place. They just have this kind of placeholder. At least that's what I took from his testimony, that's the issue, because that was not the intent of the legislation when it was created. And so having these public hearings would be beneficial for all the constituents.
Thank you.
And here's the reality, and I think this is what it gets to. You know, I think that what Mr. Pruski is arguing is this is going to turn into political theater, right? If the 3 members in the minority want to have a hearing, then they ask for the hearing and they come in and they can make a big racket about these things. On the other hand, Mr. Svensson's saying, look, you know, the council majority is going to block this if they're in lockstep with the administration. I see both points of view, but if I have to come down on one side or the other and say where I'm going to protect, where I think it's more important to protect, I think ensuring that the minority has protection, that they can make these requests, is going to serve the taxpayers better than making it this 4-person vote that requires you to come in and get this hearing. So ultimately, that's the idea with this, is that you can have this hearing. And I think the concern of, well, this is going to turn into political theater. Well, if it is, and if there's nothing there, then it's a total waste of time and it's a total waste of effort. But at the same time, if it is actually something that's legitimate, how else are you going to get it out? So ultimately, I think that that's where, if you're looking at the balance of these two concerns and you have to line up in one place or the other, I certainly think that that's where I would come down and land on it. I see that I've sparked a lot of debate with my comments as usual, so can't wait to hear from all of you.
And I've never thought that we had to be particularly partisan on nearly anything that we've done. But there's one area where we have always been a 4-3, and that's on our budget ordinances. And I have to say, I really hope that this upcoming budget season, we go 7-0 on the county budget. Because after discussions like this, where I realize I'm in a particular spot, I'm in a particular difficult spot, because I was the fourth vote for Ms. Fiedler's prior bill. And I am a co-sponsor of Mr. Pruski's and my colleague's bill tonight. So how I vote is going to ultimately determine which way this goes. And I don't know that that's a partisan or a nonpartisan thing. I can see, just as Mr. Volke said, policy reasons on both sides of the issue for both bills. And for, you know, anyone out there who thinks this is easy or you have the answer, I mean, apart from Mr. Svensson, I hope you would have spoken up, because we're, you know, 7 people who have to try to craft legislation where we don't get to talk about it except in public. We don't have any mechanism for working that out except maybe, you know, individual phone calls with each other where we play telephone. We end up with misunderstandings. We send emails. We end up with misunderstandings or lost threads. This is not an easy job. And I think everybody out there could use a reminder of that. We're about to have even more difficult discussions beyond this one tonight that's just about money. Our next conversations are going to have to do with life-saving and life-protecting measures, among many other things that we're going to deal with for the rest of this year. And I expect and I believe that we can all work together, regardless of our D or our R. Who cares? We all care about the welfare of the residents and the businesses of this county. That's all I care about anyway. And I may vote yes for both bills because, you know what? I don't think either one is particularly a bad way to go. They're both a good way to go. It's an important issue, but I do want to make sure everyone understands money is not the only issue, nor is a public hearing the only issue. Because we also know that public hearings are not fully indicative of what everybody thinks in this county. But I do agree that it's better to have the opportunity to have a public hearing than none. That's what I have to say.